I decided to invite them to dinner in an expensive restaurant, where we all had a wonderful time. I never sent any bills to anybody who had accepted our invitation, and a few criticized us for being utterly foolish and not sending out any bills. I personally thanked them for accepting our invitation and for being our friends, and was looking forward to having their company next time. I was certainly learning some Germanic customs. I remember a very quiet family in our neighborhood. One day we were invited to their place for a cup of coffee and chat. Magda was, as always, very reluctant to visit people unless she could preach the word of God to them, and if they were to visit us, she preferred only our brothers in faith to do so. However, as we went to their home, both husband and wife bragged about how many jobs they had. The husband said that he frequented a lovely brothel after work and had met this gorgeous girl there. The wife explained that while she was at work with one of her clients, a handsome man came along, and he was absolutely fabulous. Later they discovered that they had been meeting at her place of work, where they introduced themselves to each other. A married couple, being so busy with their respective employments, had forgotten all about each other and met one another at the wife's place of employment as if they were meeting for the first time. But they were happy. Magda interpreted it as worldliness, which we should avoid. I felt great sadness that people were so busy they had no time to get to know each other, let alone live their lives, only working while filling their minds with dreams of tomorrow. Magda did not want to have anything to do with those immoral, worldly people anymore. One evening we invited Magda's special friends to dinner at our place. We all enjoyed the food and the stories we shared, and when our guests decided to leave, for it was getting late, they asked how much they owed us. We were not providing a restaurant service, although it was nice of them, willing to share the costs, but since we had invited them and offered them dinner out of our love, I was not going to ask them to contribute. Instead, they could invite us if they could afford it, and if they so desired. However, when they asked me again how much they owed us, I jokingly answered them with a few thousand German marks. They laughed and were finally convinced that there was no need for a contribution. Magdalena was unable to realize that what I said was just a joke, and very seriously chastised me in front of her friends about what an outrageous and stupid man I was, asking them to pay me that kind of money. I did not know how to react to that outburst, and light-heartedly told them that they could bring me a huge block of chocolate next time, and that would be just fine. Although the German language and expressions are indeed very rich, yet lacking some of the important elements in life, some people could not see the funnier side of everyday living, being joyful and laughing a little. Magda unfortunately belonged to that category, for she might have thought her face would crack if she laughed a little. As it happened, those friends brought a block of chocolate for us to share, and as usual, Magda raised her voice, asking me, rather loudly and embarrassingly, "Did you say thank you to them?" This attitude of hers was often experienced on other occasions, and continued for many years to come. However, at the time, I took it like a joke, and continued with my specialized attitude. On that occasion I said, "My mamma asked me to thank you, and so thank you again, mamma." I found it very hard to swallow being treated like a 10-year-old, and for a while I could do nothing about it other than endure her morbid behavior. I believe this characteristic of hers was either genetically inherited or encouraged by her faithful brothers. Apart from Magda's parents, only the witnesses, brothers and sisters, who adhered to the truth visited us. I can never forget the two young men, obviously extremely close to each other, although not as brothers born of the same parents, but otherwise, almost like two lovers, who used to visit us from the local Kingdom Hall. One of them showed a somewhat extremely special interest in Magda, and when they were around, she always belittled me in front of those dear brothers, as if I needed to learn some wisdom from them. Allegedly, my level of enlightenment was a touch too low. Maybe her mother treated her husband the same way. I thought that either one or both of her so-called faithful brothers were initially appointed to teach her the truth through their specialized Bible study. As time went by, she became more and more convinced, extreme and fanatical, that this was the only way towards salvation and entry into the new world order after Armageddon. She was most certainly totally self-righteous. Was it due to her upbringing? Maybe being a supreme German had something to do with it, as some other friends believed. Others could not be considered as intelligent, and perhaps this was the reason for such specialized behavior towards me. However, I believe that being German had nothing to do with it. But being a Jehovah's Witness strongly influenced her behavior. Many Germans I have known were very lovely people, therefore I can only conclude that her state of mind was due to her belief that she was in that truth. As one can sense, the wisdom required obviously could not be gained by associating with a low-grade person like me. What is said by every other Jehovah's Witness could only be the truth as far as she was concerned, and yet she would never have chosen to stay with me if she knew the actual reality about me. In fact, as mentioned, I was never given the opportunity to declare anything about me. I was pushed into a mold to perform something according to the dictates of a controller. I therefore kept silent, only playing a role, while hoping that one day she would discover more about my background, and that would be the greatest test on her part. Would she then still accept me? Has she ever loved me? I truly believe that she loved the imagined Jehovah's Witness in me, but she never loved Suren. She would say to me, if I did not know the truth and was not a Jehovah's Witness, I would make a really good whore. Whenever I remember this, my eyes water. She repeated this philosophy of hers many times, even in years to come. Obviously, it made one think that it could have been her real desire in the first place. I found it to be terribly sad and very hard even to imagine, but my recordings of those times never lie. We are shaped by our thoughts. We become what we think. When the mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves. Buddha. Like many others, Magda could never see herself being exactly the same as the Holy Scriptures pointed at in regard to the haughtiness she constantly displayed. One could only hope and needed to be extraordinarily tolerant towards her, while patiently waiting for some light to shine. Obtaining real estate in the New World Order after Armageddon was the most important issue in her life, and therefore pleasing God above everything else, as dictated by the Jehovah's Witnesses' interpretations of the Bible, was of prime importance. However, while the German government's pressure increased, and I was subjected to interviews and interrogations by their officers in regard to my permanency in Germany, they repeatedly told me that they could not guarantee my stay in their country. One officer even told me that they worked very hard to keep the German race as pure as possible, but the foreigners still kept coming. However, Germany was accepting guest workers to work in industries that citizens of the country would not want to. Just like an omen, many more foreign nationals, especially those from Muslim countries, including Turkey, started to move into Germany en masse, marrying, having children, working and buying properties, and permanently remaining there. I suppose I was one of the unlucky ones, completely opposed to. My studying and being married to a German citizen was totally ignored. After all these years, foreign nationals have changed the characteristics of Europe, and there are more mosques in Germany today than anywhere else in Central Europe. There are also more socially unacceptable behavior patterns, family breakdowns, teenage suicides, and more unemployment in the country. And they can no longer get rid of those from Muslim countries who made Germany their home, for they became citizens of the fatherland. I was to remain simply unwanted, and the situation forced me to follow my own instincts, so I decided to pursue my applications for emigration to either Canada or Australia. Whichever application was approved first, I was going to accept with the heartfelt desire to leave Germany for good. But how was I to convince Magda that in the long run immigration to another country was vitally important for me, as I did not desire to be deported to Turkey, where I would be considered nothing more than an Armenian dog, and that she would feel totally lost. I could not be completely welcomed back in France, because many friends I left behind had the tendency to think in terms of why did he prefer to stay in those other countries, or what is wrong with us, in an extremely nationalistic sense. Our applications for immigration to Australia were successful, while Canadians were taking their time. Magda made several inquiries about whether it was a good thing to go to Australia, according to Jehovah's Witnesses' viewpoints. Apparently, she was advised by the elders that there was still urgent need for Jehovah's servants to engage in preaching about the kingdom of God in Australia. Since they all agreed with her decision to live in Australia, she was happy about the prospect of settling there, away from all the unnecessary political issues one had to put up with. I was content with the idea of not needing to try, and convince her that I had no choice other than go to another country. When I initially inquired about immigration through Australia House in London, I collected a number of books, records, and maps about this great continent, apart from making my first application. Now, continuing with the process, having several interviews, providing doctors' reports about our health, I was eagerly but impatiently waiting for the positive results. When the application was approved, we were interviewed for one final time, and I was asked a few simple questions about what percentage of me belonged to the white race, if I spoke any English, would I worry about any written exams, what amount of money I was going to take with me, and my academic background. Similar questions were also asked of Magda, and furthermore, we were both questioned if we would undertake any kind of jobs if we could not be employed immediately within the fields of our expertise for a while. We continued with our daily lives for a few more months and finally received our documents, tickets and itineraries for the journey. What a joy and excitement it was, but at the same time we had a few minor concerns. How would the journey be? Would one have good accommodation and good employment? Obviously, I was going to be the only person earning money, for she constantly exclaimed that we needed not be too materialistic, according to the wisdom, and she should not really work, for she had very little English and a young child. Besides, she was looking forward to pioneering in Australia, preaching the good news of God's kingdom. How was she going to do that with so little English? We started making our preparations, visiting friends and packing. Australian officials advised us not to take our white goods or televisions with us, for they had the most recent models and, believing them, we left those things behind. But my cameras, a small color television set, which I included discreetly, my telescopes, lots of academic books, some furniture, and bedding I placed in the crates we were provided with. All our belongings, other than small personal ones, were fitted into one huge shipping container, and when the time came, were conveyed to Australia, then to our eventual address. It was interesting how we had both been called upon for one last time, interviewed about our medical history, our academic backgrounds, and work experience by the Australian authorities, somewhat surprising Magda about my educational achievements. She was not impressed about me having studied medicine, and particularly behavioral psychology, continually asking how it was possible that someone like me could study the devil's science, advising me never to practice something like that, because this would entitle me to hypnotize people against their will, just like the evil psychologists and psychics. I want to believe that you are not going to practice something like that. It is devil worship, she repeatedly said to me. But I was looking forward to practicing what I had studied, and also my other studies, namely sociology and the arts. Under all circumstances, I had to be prepared to do all kinds of things to look after my family, as well as live a life without the various hobbies which I had developed over the years. When I presented my academic documents, I was told by the Australian authorities that I had a very exciting background, and my qualifications would be immediately considered. That excited me, although Magda was ill-pleased. I supposed that in our early days in Australia, I might need to take any jobs for a short while before more permanent employment as a lecturer in subjects I was specialized in became available. Both Magdalene and I were enthused. We fulfilled the requirements, all the criteria necessary, and formalities. Finally, I was going to be free from all those struggles and uncertainties in regard to my permanent stay somewhere around the world. Nothing better could have happened to me other than being enabled to emigrate to Australia. I had already fallen in love with the land down under, long before I arrived on this magical continent. There was so much more yet to discover and learn, but one issue still bothered me. That was the White Australia policy, and one had to be at least 75% white to be accepted. I was not sure how to react to the reality of the original dwellers of the land. Had they any say? As I said before, there was much to learn. Now that we had packed everything, and it had been collected and forwarded to Australia, we travelled to Bremerhaven to board the Angelina Lauro of the Flotta Lines, a huge passenger liner which was to take us to Southampton, Gibraltar, Messina, Sicily, and after visiting Pompeii, to Islas Canarias de Tenerife, around west coast of Africa to Cape Town, Fremantle, and to Melbourne, followed by a plane journey to Hobart. We were going to stop at all those ports, and could disembark and go sightseeing. It was going to be a great holiday, lasting well over a month. What a wonderful way to start a new adventure in life. We farewelled our friends, mainly Magdalene's and her relatives, and of course the local witnesses, for there were no other friends apart from the few I had made during my university days. I realized what an isolated existence I was leading. My parents were far away, and so were all my other school friends. If I had the pleasure of meeting them from long-distant places, there would be all kinds of excuses created by the witnesses for me not to associate with them anyway. Clearly, they belonged to the world, and we were discouraged in any such friendships, only expected to follow the biblical advice. Often told that the bad company of everyday people would spoil the good characters of God's chosen. It was better to associate only with God's faithful servants.